HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Big Book of Victorian Mysteries, edited by Otto Penzler, read by Dan Calley, Rachael Beresford, and Stephen Bowlby. Introduction. The Victorian era is, for what seem like obvious reasons, defined by the lifespan of the British Queen Victoria, which dates from her birth in 1837 and ends with her expiration in 1901. Those early years, when she was an infant and then a toddler and then an adolescent, although it may be difficult to envision her as such, did not actually produce much in the way of what we recognize as Victorian fiction, which developed later in her life and beyond. Indeed, much Edwardian fiction, if we read it without being aware of publication dates, has precisely the tone and attitude of the works produced during her long reign. Nonetheless, this volume strictly adheres to the parameters of her time on this side of the grass. The possibility of detective fiction was slim until there was such a thing as a detective. In England, the first stirring of an organised police force was the formation of Robert Peel's Metropolitan Police Act in 1829, which established the London's Metropolitan Police. As a consequence, the branch that became the Criminal Investigation Department, CID, was created in 1878 to undergo detective work. Acknowledgement of Peel's achievement continues to the present day, as English police officers are commonly referred to as bobbies. Yes, there had been Bow Street runners toward the end of the 18th century, but crediting them with being organised is an optimistic hallucination. This development of a police department resulted in a new literary genre that quickly became highly popular: the memoirs of police officers. This avalanche of allegedly true real-life adventures, memoirs, reminiscences, experiences, notebooks, etc. of detectives frequently noted the protagonist's connection to Scotland Yard or other police forces in Edinburgh, Dublin, London, and other more remote crime-fighting organisations, became the favourite reading of a large section of the British public. The proliferation of these books, mainly written by hacks who were far more interested in creating thrills and suspense than in accurately portraying genuine police cases, was abetted by the development of printing and binding processes that made books less expensive to produce and thus more affordable for a larger portion of the public than ever before. This coincided with a greater emphasis on literacy in Great Britain, increasing the potential readership for these memoirs, as well as other types of popular fiction. The first author of distinction to use a policeman as a major character in a work of fiction was Charles Dickens, who created Inspector Bucket as a crucial figure in Bleak House, 1852 to 1853. The publication of the novel did not spur an immediate rush by the literary crowd to write more novels and stories about police officers, but it did open the door a crack to encourage writers to work in the crime genre, frequently known in those days as sensation novels. Wilkie Collins, a friend and frequent collaborator of Dickens, sometimes credited, sometimes not, was the first and best author who followed in his wake, first with a nearly perfect book, The Woman in White, 1860, and then The Moonstone, 1868, famously described by T.S. Eliot as the first, the longest, and the best detective novel of all time. He was wrong on all three counts, but it would be rude to quibble about this worthy book. In the short form, credit is correctly given to Edgar Allan Poe with the invention of the detective short story upon his publication of The Murders in the Rue Morgue in 1841. While the story strives for and succeeds in creating excitement, stretching credibility, it and Poe's next two detective stories, The Mystery of Marie Roget, a genuinely boring narrative, and the exemplary The Purloined Letter, laid the foundation for detective fiction as it has been conceived and executed ever since. These seminal works, collected in Poe's Tales, 1845, were relatively unsuccessful, as the public cried for more of his tales of horror and the supernatural, and contemporary authors therefore did not follow in his footsteps. Seeley Register's novel The Dead Letter, 1867, caused no stir, though Anna Catherine Green's The Leavenworth Case, 1878, more than 30 years later, enjoyed success, as did the books she wrote for the next 45 years. Apart from these and a few additional anomalies, it took Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes, the most famous person in the world, to bring the detective story to its place as the most popular literary form in all of fiction. Although the publication of his first two novels about Holmes, A Study in Scarlet, 1887, and The Sign of the Four, 1890, brought Doyle some success, it was his clever invention of connected stories that put him at the apex of the pantheon of the most significant British writers of detective fiction. While it had long been a popular feature of magazines to serially run chapters of novels in its pages, Doyle conceived the notion of having a complete story in a single issue, but featuring the same central character in an ongoing series. He suggested the idea to the fledgling Strand magazine, and H. Greenup Smith, its editor, understood the concept and immediately jumped on board. The success of Holmes and the Strand were assured. After Holmes the Deluge, as the great bookman and Sherlockian Vincent Starrett accurately noted, the enormity of the popularity enjoyed by Doyle and his Holmes adventures was lost on neither authors nor publishers. The race was on to find the next detective hero, and there was no shortage of authors scribbling madly away, nor of magazine and book publishers eager to publish them. Many were promoted as a rival of Holmes, as if the new Holmes, the American Holmes, the female Holmes, and so on. Some were excellent, many were pretty good, and the majority were dross. Roughly an equal percentage to most things in the world of the arts. This volume attempts to identify and collect the greatest of the great, the best of the very good, and avoids the dross in the history of Victorian mystery stories. The self-imposed limit of one story per author, with a few exceptions, means that you won't find 20 Sherlock Holmes stories here, nor some of the outstanding works by Wilkie Collins, Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, and Robert Louis Stevenson. You will find familiar names, and some obscure ones, with a focus on including stories of historical significance in the development of the genre. In addition to the outstanding detective stories of the era, there are a large number of crime stories. While an immediate response to the notion of burglars, robbers, and other miscreants may seem counterintuitive to an aficionado of detective fiction, now as well as then, the skill of the creators of these characters often changes our minds, giving us a somewhat different perspective. Criminality is repugnant to most decent and honourable people, yet sympathetic safecrackers, conmen and other rogues may not be quite the scourge that they seem to be at first blush. Many of the crooks in this collection steal for a good cause, to help a friend extricate himself from a difficult situation, or to behave like Robin Hood. Some of the most charming criminals merely love the excitement of the game, and some steal from people who seem eminently worthy of having their pockets picked. As mentioned previously, the early days of the Edwardian era were hardly distinguishable tonally and psychologically from the latter years of Victoria's reign. This, however, slowly began to change, and then was tumultuously and irrevocably altered with the outbreak of the First World War. As the 19th century drew to a close, the seeds of change were beginning to sprout like daffodils in March when it was too cold for them to blossom, but their heads were visible poking through the softening ground. For what seemed like the first time in British and American history, young men ceased to attend evening prayers, while women openly smoked cigarettes. Some even advocated suffrage. It wasn't long before they exposed their ankles. Automobiles were replacing horse-drawn carriages, and gaslight was giving way to electric illumination. A new era was beginning. The Victorian age seemed a simpler, more genteel time, romantic in our vision. The harsh reality for the greatest part of the population was quite different, as poverty still held them captive. Most of the stories in this book have the delicious image of manor houses and gentlemen's clubs, of dress balls, dinner jackets and beautiful gowns, of fabulous jewels and glorious inheritances, and excellent manners. Let's enjoy this vision, not think about what dentistry was like a century and a half ago. Otto Penzler. Detective Stories. One Night in a Gaming House. Waters. While hardly a distinguished stylist, William Russell, (1807 to 1877), using the pseudonym Waters, holds an important position as the first British author to write detective short stories. Little is known of his life. His American publisher even published his name as Thomas Waters on some early printings and Thomas Russell on others. But he was surprisingly prolific, considering that he was the first to write this new kind of fiction. England's Metropolitan Police Act of 1829 allowed for the creation of a detective branch in 1842, which ultimately became the CID in 1878, colloquially known today as Scotland Yard. Since there were very few police officers, and they were largely unpopular, as honest citizens didn't like plainclothes spies among them, it is not surprising that there had been no notion of writing about them. Waters even preceded Inspector Bucket, the police detective in Charles Dickens's Bleak House, 1852 to 1853, who is often cited as the first policeman in British mystery fiction. Russell, who also wrote as Inspector F. Gustavus Sharp. Lieutenant Wainford and Warner Warren produced about 50 books, all in the mystery field. In The Recollections of a Detective Policeman, 1852, the stories are told in first person by Waters, in what purports to be the real-life experiences of a member of the Metropolitan Police in cases that involve forgers, counterfeiters, thieves, confidence men, and murderers. With his early success in solving crimes, he is promoted to the rank of detective and given 2 assistants, one of whom is an expert ventriloquist. The success of this volume encouraged not only Russell, but a tidal wave of other authors to produce more real-life adventures, memoirs, experiences, notebooks, diaries, cases, autobiographies, reminiscences, and revelations over the next half-century. Most were first published in the newly created Yellowbacks, inexpensive books bound in colourful yellow boards with bright illustrations of the heroes, often engaged in battle with a villain or talking to a pretty woman. One Night in a Gaming House was originally published in the July 28, 1849 issue of Chambers' Edinburgh Journal, and it was first collected in The Recollections of a Detective Policeman, New York, Cornish, Lamport, 1852. It was first published in England as The Recollections of a Detective Police Officer, London, J&C Brown, 1856. One Night in a Gaming House. Waters. A little more than a year after the period when adverse circumstances, chiefly the result of my own reckless follies, compelled me to enter the ranks of the Metropolitan Police as the sole means left me of procuring food and raiment, the attention of one of the principal chiefs of the force was attracted towards me by the ingenuity and boldness which I was supposed to have manifested in hitting upon and unravelling a clue which ultimately led to the detection and punishment of the perpetrators of an artistically contrived fraud upon an eminent tradesman of the West End of London. The chief sent for me, and after a somewhat lengthened conversation, not only expressed approbation of my conduct in the particular matter under discussion, but hinted that he might shortly need my services in other affairs requiring intelligence and resolution. "I think I have met you before," he remarked with a meaning smile on dismissing me. "When you occupied a different position from your present one, do not alarm yourself. I have no wish to pry unnecessarily into other men's secrets. Waters is a name common enough in all ranks of society, and I may, you know," here the cold smile deepened in ironical expression, "be mistaken. At all events, the testimony of the gentleman whose recommendation obtained your admission to the force, I have looked into the matter since I heard of your behaviour in the late business, is a sufficient guarantee that nothing more serious than imprudence and folly can be laid to your charge. I have neither right nor inclination to inquire further. Tomorrow, in all probability, I shall send for you." I came to the conclusion, as I walked homewards, that the chief's intimation of having previously met me in another sphere of life was a random and unfounded one, as I had seldom visited London in my prosperous days, and still more rarely mingled in its society. My wife, however, to whom I of course related the substance of the conversation, reminded me that he had once been at Doncaster during the races, and suggested that he might possibly have seen and noticed me there. This was a sufficiently probable explanation of the hint, but whether the correct one or not, I cannot decide, as he never afterwards alluded to the subject, and I had not the slightest wish to renew it. 3 days elapsed before I received the expected summons. On waiting on him, I was agreeably startled to find that I was to be at once employed on a mission which the most sagacious and experienced of detective officers would have felt honoured to undertake. "Here is a written description of the persons of this gang of blacklegs, swindlers, and forgers," concluded the Commissioner, summing up his instructions. "It will be your object to discover their private haunts and secure legal evidence of their nefarious practices. We have been hitherto baffled, principally, I think, through the too hasty zeal of the officers employed. You must especially avoid that error. They are practised scoundrels, and it will require considerable patience, as well as acumen, to unkennel and bring them to justice. One of their more recent victims is young Mr. Merton, son by a former marriage of the Dowager Lady Everton. Her ladyship has applied to us for assistance in extricating him from the toils in which he is meshed. You will call on her at 5 o'clock this afternoon, in plain clothes, of course, and obtain whatever information on the subject she may be able to afford. Remember to communicate directly with me, and any assistance you may require shall be promptly rendered." With these and a few minor directions, needless to recapitulate, I was dismissed to a task which, difficult and possibly perilous as it might prove, I hailed as a delightful relief from the wearying monotony and dull routine of ordinary duty. I hastened home, and after dressing with great care, the best part of my wardrobe had been fortunately saved by Emily from the wreck of my fortunes, I proceeded to Lady Everton's mansion. I was immediately marshalled to the drawing-room, where I found her ladyship and her daughter, a beautiful fairy-looking girl, awaiting my arrival. Lady Everton appeared greatly surprised at my appearance, differing, as I dare say it altogether did, from her abstract idea of a policeman, however attired or disguised, and it was not till she had perused the note of which I was the bearer that her haughty and incredulous stare became mitigated to a glance of lofty condescendent civility. "Be seated, Mr. Waters," said her ladyship, waving me to a chair. "This note informs me that you have been selected for the duty of endeavouring to extricate my son from the perilous entanglements in which he has unhappily involved himself." I was about to reply, for I was silly enough to feel somewhat nettled at the noble lady's haughtiness of manner, that I was engaged in the public service of extirpating a gang of swindlers with whom her son had involved himself, and was there to procure from her ladyship any information she might be possessed of likely to forward so desirable a result. But fortunately the remembrance of my actual position, spite of my gentleman's attire, flashed vividly upon my mind, and instead of permitting my glib tongue to wag irreverently in the presence of a right honourable, I bowed with deferential acquiescence. Her ladyship proceeded, and I in substance obtained the following information. Mr. Charles Merton, during the few months which had elapsed since the attainment of his majority, had very literally fallen amongst thieves. A passion for gambling seemed to have taken entire possession of his being, and almost every day as well as night of his haggard and feverish life was passed at play. A run of ill luck, according to his own belief, but in very truth a run of downright robbery, had set in against him, and he had not only dissipated all the ready money which he had inherited, and the large sums which the foolish indulgence of his lady mother had supplied him with, but had involved himself in bonds, bills, and other obligations to a frightful amount. The principal agent in effecting this ruin was one Sandford, a man of fashionable and dashing exterior, and the presiding spirit of the knot of desperadoes whom I was commissioned to hunt out. Strange to say, Mr. Merton had the blindest reliance upon this man's honour, and even now, tricked, despoiled as he had been by him and his gang, relied upon his counsel and assistance for escape from the desperate position in which he was involved. The Everton estates had passed, in default of male issue, to a distant relative of the late lord, so that ruin, absolute and irremediable, stared both the wretched dupe and his relatives in the face. Lady Everton's jointure was not a very large one, and her son had been permitted to squander sums which should have been devoted to the discharge of claims which were now pressed harshly against her. I listened with the deepest interest to Lady Everton's narrative. Repeatedly during the course of it, as she incidentally alluded to the manners and appearance of Sandford, who had been introduced by Mr. Merton to his mother and sister, a suspicion which the police papers had first awakened, that the gentleman in question was an old acquaintance of my own, and one, moreover, whose favours I was extremely desirous to return in kind, flashed with increased conviction across my mind. This surmise I, of course, kept to myself, and after emphatically cautioning the ladies to keep our proceedings a profound secret from Mr. Merton, I took my leave, amply provided by the resources requisite for carrying into effect the scheme which I had resolved upon. I also arranged that, instead of waiting personally on her ladyship, which might excite observation and suspicion, I should report progress by letter through the post. If it should be he, thought I as I emerged into the street. The bare suspicion had sent the blood through my veins with furious violence. If this Sandford be, as I suspect, that villain Carden, success will indeed be triumph, victory. Lady Everton need not in that case seek to animate my zeal by promises of money recompense. A blighted existence, a young and gentle wife by his means cast down from opulence to sordid penury, would stimulate the dullest craven that ever crawled the earth to energy and action. Pray heaven my suspicion prove correct, and then, O mine enemy, look well to yourself, for the avenger is at your heels. Sandford, I had been instructed, was usually present at the Italian opera during the ballet. The box he generally occupied was designated in the memoranda of the police, and as I saw by the bills that a very successful piece was to be performed that evening, I determined on being present. I entered the house a few minutes past 10 o'clock, just after the commencement of the ballet, and looked eagerly round. The box in which I was instructed to seek my man was empty. The momentary disappointment was soon repaid. 5 minutes had not elapsed when Carden, looking more insolently triumphant than ever, entered arm in arm with a pale, aristocratic-looking young man, whom I had no difficulty, from his striking resemblance to a portrait in Lady Everton's drawing-room, in deciding to be Mr. Merton. My course of action was at once determined on, pausing only to master the emotion which the sight of the glittering reptile in whose poisonous folds I had been involved and crushed inspired. I passed to the opposite side of the house and boldly entered the box. Carden's back was towards me, and I tapped him lightly on the shoulder. He turned quickly round, and if a basilisk had confronted him, he could scarcely have exhibited greater terror and surprise. My aspect, nevertheless, was studiously bland and conciliating, and my outstretched hand seemed to invite a renewal of our old friendship. "Waters," he at last stammered, feebly accepting my proffered grasp. "Who would have thought of meeting you here?" "Not you, certainly, since you stare at an old friend as if he were some frightful goblin about to swallow you. Really." "Hush, let us speak together in the lobby. An old friend," he added, in answer to Mr. Merton's surprised stare. "We will return in an instant." "Why, what is all this, Waters?" said Carden, recovering his wonted sang-froid the instant we were alone. "I understood you had retired from amongst us, were in fact, what shall I say?" "Ruined. Done up. Nobody should know that better than you." "My good fellow, you do not imagine—" "I imagine nothing, my dear Carden. I was very thoroughly done brown, as it is written in the vulgar tongue. But fortunately my kind old uncle—" "Pasgrove is dead," interrupted my old acquaintance, eagerly jumping to a conclusion, "and you are his heir. I congratulate you, my dear fellow. This is indeed a charming reverse of circumstances." "Yes, but mind, I have given up the old game. No more dice devilry for me. I have promised Emily never even to touch a card again." The cold, hard eye of the incarnate fiend, he was little else, gleamed mockingly as these good intentions of a practised gamester fell upon his ear. But he only replied, "Very good, quite right, my dear boy. But come, let me introduce you to Mr. Merton, a highly connected personage, I assure you. By the by, Waters," he added in a caressing, confidential tone. "My name, for family and other reasons, which I will hereafter explain to you, is for the present Sandford." "Sandford?" "Yes, do not forget. But allons, or the ballet will be over." I was introduced in due form to Mr. Merton as an old and esteemed friend, whom he, Sandford, had not seen for many months. At the conclusion of the ballet, Sandford proposed that we should adjourn to the European coffee house nearly opposite. This was agreed to, and out we sallied. At the top of the staircase we jostled against the commissioner, who, like us, was leaving the house. He bowed slightly to Mr. Merton's apology, and his eye wandered briefly and coldly over our persons, but not the faintest sign of interest or recognition escaped him. I thought it possible he did not know me in my changed apparel, but looking back after descending a few steps, I was quickly undeceived. A sharp, swift glance, expressive both of encouragement and surprise, shot out from under his penthouse brows, and as swiftly vanished. He did not know how little I needed spurring to the goal we both had in view. We discussed 2 or 3 bottles of wine with much gaiety and relish. Sandford especially was in exuberant spirits, brimming over with brilliant anecdote and sparkling badinage. He saw me in a fresh, rich prey, and his eager spirit revelled by anticipation in the victory which he nothing doubted to obtain over my excellent intentions and wife-pledged virtue. About 12:30 o'clock he proposed to adjourn. This was eagerly assented to by Mr. Merton, who had for some time exhibited unmistakable symptoms of impatience and unrest. "You will accompany us, Waters?" said Sandford, as we rose to depart. "There is, I suppose, no vow registered in the matrimonial archives against looking on at a game played by others?" "Oh, no, but don't ask me to play." "Certainly not." And a devilish sneer curled his lip. "Your virtue shall suffer no temptation, be assured." We soon arrived before the door of a quiet, respectable-looking house in one of the streets leading from the Strand. A low, peculiar knock given by Sandford was promptly answered. Then a password, which I did not catch, was whispered by him through the keyhole, and we passed in. We proceeded upstairs to the first floor, the shutters of which were carefully closed, so that no intimation of what was going on could possibly reach the street. The apartment was brilliantly lighted, a roulette table and dice and cards were in full activity. Wine and liquors of all varieties were profusely paraded. There were about 6 persons present, I soon discovered, besides the gang, and that comprised 11 or 12 well-dressed desperadoes, whose sinister aspects induced a momentary qualm lest one or more of the pleasant party might suspect or recognize my vocation. This, however, I reflected, was scarcely possible. My beat during the short period I had been in the force was far distant from the usual haunts of such gentry, and I was otherwise unknown in London. Still, questioning glances were eagerly directed towards my introducer, and one big burly fellow, a foreigner, the rascals were the scum of various countries, was very unpleasantly inquisitorial. "J'en réponds," I heard Sandford say in answer to his iterated queries. And he added something in a whisper which brought a sardonic smile to the fellow's lips and induced a total change in his demeanour towards myself. This was reassuring, for though provided with pistols, I should, I felt, have little chance with such utterly reckless ruffians as those by whom I was surrounded. Play was proposed, and though at first stoutly refusing, I feigned to be gradually overcome by irresistible temptation, and sat down to blind hazard with my foreign friend for moderate stakes. I was graciously allowed to win, and in the end found myself richer in devil's money by about £10. Mr. Merton was soon absorbed in the chances of the dice, and lost large sums, for which, when the money he had brought with him was exhausted, he gave written acknowledgments. The cheating practised upon him was really audacious, and anyone but a tyro must have repeatedly detected it. He, however, appeared not to entertain the slightest suspicion of the fair play of his opponents, guiding himself entirely by the advice of his friend and counsellor, Sandford, who did not himself play. The amiable assemblage broke up about 6 in the morning, each person retiring singly by the back way, receiving as he departed a new password for the next evening. A few hours afterwards, I waited on the commissioner to report the state of affairs.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?